The briefing room was silent. Commander Hayes stood at the edge of the long metal table, looking at the holographic display floating in the center. The planet spinning before her was not blue and green like Earth. It was red and brown, with massive storm systems that never seemed to stop moving across its surface. The Galactic Council seal hung in the air next to the image. Had seen many dangerous worlds in her 30 years of service. She had fought on planets where the atmosphere burned your lungs. She had landed on moons where the ground itself was poisoned. But this world was different. The Council had given it a name that made even experienced soldiers uncomfortable. 9, Class 14. Captain George stood next to her, his arms crossed. He was younger than only 42, but his face showed the wear of too many difficult missions. He looked at the planet and shook his head slowly. "They cannot be serious," George said. His voice was low and steady, the voice of a man who had learned not to waste words. The council representative, a tall figure with 4 arms and blue skin, stepped forward. His name was difficult to say in human language, so everyone called him Coordinator. He had been the one to bring this assignment to the Terran Coalition military. He had made the long journey from the Galactic Center to Earth specifically to present this proposal to and her team. "I understand your concern," Coordinator said. His translation device gave him a smooth, almost musical human voice. "But the Council has carefully considered all options. You are the only species we believe can survive on 9 long enough to establish operations there." Did not look away from the spinning planet. "Tell us again why we need to establish operations on a Class 14 at all. What makes 9 worth the lives of good soldiers?" Coordinator moved to the display and tapped it with one of his lower arms. New information appeared. Mineral deposits, energy readings, resource maps that made the planet look like a treasure chest. 3,000 years ago, a species tried to settle 9, said. They lasted 7 months. The predators killed half their team. The weather systems destroyed their equipment. The ground itself rebelled against them through constant earthquakes. The species gave up and left. Every group that has tried since has failed in the same way. "Then why are you asking us to try?" George asked the question that had not wanted to ask. "Because you are different," said simply. "Humans come from Earth. Your species has learned to survive on a hostile planet. You do not give up easily. You adapt. The Council believes that if any species can make 9 work, it will be humans." Finally turned away from the display, she looked at Coordinator directly. "How many soldiers will we have for this mission?" 150, said. "Scientists, engineers, soldiers, the best your military has to offer." 150, repeated. She was already calculating in her mind. 150 people against a planet that had killed thousands. 150 against creatures that no one had ever successfully faced for long. "The Council will provide complete support," continued. "You will have access to the latest equipment. We will monitor your progress carefully, and if the mission becomes impossible, you will have the option to withdraw." George laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "If it becomes impossible, Coordinator, this mission already sounds impossible. You are asking us to go to a world where every other species has failed. You are asking us to stay on a planet where the ground shakes and the creatures hunt in packs. You are asking us to do the impossible." "Yes," Coordinator said. He looked at both of them with steady eyes. "But I am asking humans to do it. That is the difference." Moved to the window that looked out over the Earth below. She could see the clouds moving across the atmosphere. She could see the ocean blue and deep. Earth was harsh, yes, but it was home. It was known. It was safe in the way that only a home can be. 9 was not home. 9 was nothing but danger and hunger and chaos. "If we do this," said slowly, "we do it my way, no shortcuts, no experiments on the soldiers. We build slowly and carefully. We learn the planet before we try to use it." "The Council will accept those terms," said immediately. Turned back to him. "And we will have complete authority over the mission. No orders from the Galactic Center about resource extraction or quick results. We do this right or we do not do it at all." There was a long pause. Coordinator looked at the planet spinning in the display. He looked at. Finally, he moved one of his lower arms in what might have been a nod. "The Council will accept," he said. "You have 1 year to establish a permanent settlement on 9. If you succeed, you will have command authority over the entire operation." Looked at George. He was already nodding. She could see in his face that he understood what she was thinking. This was impossible. This was dangerous. This was exactly the kind of mission that would make human soldiers legendary in the galaxy. "We will need 3 months to prepare," said. "We will need to select the team carefully, and we will need equipment that Earth manufacturing has never created before." "You will have everything you ask for," said. "Then we have an agreement," said. She did not put out her hand to shake. Human and council representatives did not do that. Instead, she met eyes and held steady. "We will turn 9 into a strategic training ground. We will show the council what humans can do when we refuse to accept impossible as an answer." Coordinator inclined his head. "I will inform the council of your acceptance. They will be pleased." After left the room, George moved to stand beside at the window. They looked out at Earth together, both knowing that they were looking at the world for what might be the last time. "Do you think we can do this?" George asked. Did not answer immediately. She thought about Earth. She thought about how humans had survived ice ages and extinction events. She thought about how humans had crossed oceans when everyone said it was impossible. She thought about how humans never gave up. "I think we are going to do something that no other species in the galaxy has done," said finally. "I think we are going to make a living hell into something that works. And I think that when we are done, the galaxy is going to remember what humans are capable of." The landing was rough. The ships came down through Nine's atmosphere like falling stones, their shields glowing red from the friction of the thick air. Inside the transport vessel, Commander Hayes held on to the overhead rail as the ship shook. Around her, 150 humans gripped their seats and held their breath. The planet's gravity was stronger than Earth's. It pulled harder on the body and made every muscle feel tired before they had even landed. The atmosphere was thick with strange particles that no Earth air filter could manage completely. The outside temperature was already visible on the ship's sensors, 94 degrees Celsius and rising. The ship's captain, a woman named Stone, looked at the instruments in front of her. "We are descending into the designated landing zone now," she said over the communication system. "Everyone prepare for touchdown. We will be on the ground in 90 seconds. The landing gear hit hard. The entire ship jolted and heard the sound of supplies falling from storage racks. Someone cried out. The ship settled and the engines cut off. For a moment, there was complete silence inside the transport. Then unbuckled her restraints and stood. "Everyone out. Equipment first, then the supply containers. Move fast and stay alert. This planet does not care if you are prepared." The soldiers moved like they had been trained. They grabbed their weapons, checked their armor, and filed toward the exit ramp. The first person to step out was Private, a young man with dark hair and steady hands. He took one step into Nine's red dirt and immediately raised his weapon. "Clear on the perimeter," he called back. One by one, the soldiers came out onto the planet's surface. The heat hit them immediately. It was not just the temperature. It was the weight of the air itself. Felt like she was breathing through wet cloth. Her suit's cooling system hummed, struggling to keep her body temperature from rising too fast. The landing zone was flat and barren. Red dirt stretched in every direction. Strange plants that looked more like stone than vegetation dotted the landscape. Nothing moved. Nothing made sound. It was as if the planet was holding its breath. Engineer moved past the soldiers toward the first supply container. He was a thick man within his beard and hands that had built things on a dozen different worlds. He looked at the dirt, the sky, the distant mountains that seemed to shimmer in the heat. "This is going to be difficult," he said too. "We expected difficult," replied. "Stay focused." For the first 6 hours, the team worked on establishing the basic perimeter. They set up the heavy equipment that would form the foundation of the settlement. The first shelter was an inflatable structure, good for only temporary use but essential for survival through the first night. It was during the setup of the power generator that they heard the sound. It started as a low rumble in the ground. Then it became a sound like nothing any of them had heard before. It was part roar and part mechanical grinding, as if the earth itself was screaming. Private Amy Foster looked up from her work. She was 24 years old and had volunteered for this mission because her family had been killed in a colonial war. She had nothing to lose and everything to prove. "What is that?" she asked. The ground shook, not a violent earthquake, but enough to make the soldiers stumble. In the distance, something moved. It was large, very large. It moved on legs that seemed too thin to hold its weight, but it moved with perfect grace. Its head was long and filled with teeth that could be seen from 100 meters away. Captain George raised his weapon but put out a hand to stop him. "Do not fire unless it attacks," she said quietly. "We do not know this planet yet." The creature turned its head toward them. It was not interested in the humans. It was hunting something in the rocks near the landing zone. It moved with deadly precision, its body low to the ground. Then it was gone, disappearing into the red landscape like a ghost. No one spoke for a long minute. "We are in its world now," said finally. "Remember that every second we are on this planet, everything here is predator. We are prey until we prove otherwise." That night was the first of many. 3 of the soldiers developed strange fevers from breathing the atmosphere too much. 2 others reported what they thought were smaller creatures moving around the perimeter of the camp. One soldier, Private David, was killed when something attacked him during a supply run. He was gathering water samples near a rocky outcropping when the creature struck. It was smaller than the first one they had seen, but faster. It was over before anyone could help him. His body was brought back to the camp in a heavy bag, held a short ceremony, and they buried him in 9's red dirt. He would be the first of many that the planet would take from them. By the end of the first week, 17 soldiers were dead. 14 had been killed by creatures. 3 had died from environmental complications that no one had predicted. Illness spread through the camp. The equipment broke down in ways that engineer had to invent solutions for. But something was changing too. The soldiers were learning. They were watching the creatures. They were noticing patterns in how the animals hunted, where they rested, what times they were most active. Slowly, the chaos was becoming something that could be understood. Dr. Victoria was the settlement's chief scientist. She spent her time analyzing the creature's behavior and the planet's geological patterns. On the 10th day, she called a meeting. "The planet follows cycles," Victoria said to the gathered soldiers and officers. "The earthquakes are not random. They follow a pattern that repeats every 37 hours. If we build with that knowledge, we can make structures that will not fall when the ground shakes." Engineer nodded. "I can work with that information. Give me the exact pattern." "The creatures also have patterns," Victoria continued. "There are territories. They do not cross certain boundaries. If we respect those boundaries, we can live alongside them without constant conflict." George looked at. He could see what she was already thinking. This was not a planet that would be conquered. It was a planet that would be understood and negotiated with. The final critical moment of Part 2 came on the 15th day. Private Amy Foster was gathering samples outside the perimeter when the wind changed direction. A massive dust storm moved across the landscape faster than anyone could have predicted. It came toward the camp like a brown wall, and it carried the smell of something dangerous. Amy was separated from the camp. Her communication system was broken by the impact of the dust particles. She could not see anything beyond a few meters. She was lost on 9, alone, with night falling and the temperature dropping toward a cold that would kill her quickly. When she did not return to camp, made a decision that surprised no one who knew her. "I want a rescue team," said. 6 soldiers, we are going to find her." "The storm is lethal," Captain warned. "We cannot see, we cannot navigate." "Then we do not leave her out there," said simply. "We find her or we die trying. That is what humans do. That is what sets us apart." The rescue team moved out into the storm. They moved slowly, calling Amy's name, listening for any sound. They went through terrain that would have killed lesser soldiers. For 3 hours they searched while the storm raged around them. They found her in a rocky depression, her suit damaged but her body still alive. The rescue team brought her back to camp through the storm, and herself helped carry her inside. Watching from a remote monitoring station light years away, the council observers noted something in their reports. They noted that the humans had risked 6 soldiers to save 1. No other species in the galaxy would have done that. No other species thought that 1 life was worth that kind of risk. But humans did. That willingness to value one another above logic and survival instinct was exactly why the Galactic Council had sent them to 9. By the end of the first week, the humans had started to understand the planet. They had lost people. They had suffered. But they were learning, adapting, and pushing forward. And on 9, adaptation was survival. 6 months had passed since the human settlement had landed on 9. The flat, barren landscape had been transformed. Where there had been only red dirt and dying plants, now there stood buildings made from materials that engineer had developed specifically for the planet. The structures were low and wide, built to withstand the earthquakes that came every 37 hours like clockwork. Commander Hayes stood on a raised platform overlooking the settlement. It was not beautiful, but it was alive. Soldiers moved between buildings. Supply containers were being unloaded from the transport ship. A water filtration system hummed in the distance. For the first time since arriving on 9, it did not feel like they were invaders on a hostile world. It felt like they were starting to belong. Dr. Victoria approached, her boots raising small clouds of red dust with each step. Victoria was thin and moved with purpose. She had spent the last 6 months studying every aspect of Nine's biology and geology. Her hair was longer now, pulled back in a practical braid, and her face was weathered from constant exposure to the planet's harsh elements. "I have made a discovery," Victoria said without greeting. She was excited, and it showed in her voice. "The mineral deposits are even larger than we thought, and they are not just valuable for economic reasons. The elements we find here could revolutionize energy production for the entire galactic community." Looked at the scientist. She knew what this information meant. It meant that other powers in the galaxy would become very interested in Nine. It meant that people would want what was here. It meant that the peaceful settlement they had built could face pressure from those who saw only profit. "Do not share this information with the Council yet," said. "We need to secure the settlement first." Victoria nodded. She understood what was not saying. They needed to make sure that Nine belonged to humans before anyone else tried to claim it. The real change in the settlement had come through an unexpected source: the creatures. When a soldier named David, no relation to Victoria, had been injured near a nesting area of smaller predators, something unexpected had happened. The creatures did not attack him. Instead, they seemed curious. David had stayed still, not making sudden movements, not showing fear. One of the creatures had approached and sniffed him carefully. Then it had walked away. From that moment, some of the soldiers had begun a strange experiment. They started to study the creatures not as enemies, but as living beings with their own behaviors and preferences. They learned that the smallest predators responded to calm voices and patient movements. Within weeks, soldiers had managed to tame several of the creatures. They were still dangerous. They were still predators, but they were no longer mindlessly violent. Private Amy Foster had taken to this work with particular enthusiasm. She spent hours with the creatures, learning their behaviors, teaching them to respond to simple commands. Within a month, she had a pack of 5 creatures that would follow her around the settlement. The other soldiers called them her hunting pack, but they were more than that. They were proof that even understanding could bridge the gap between species. Captain George had been working on something else. He had begun training soldiers from the settlement in combat techniques specifically designed for Nine. Where other military forces relied on heavy armor and powerful weapons, was developing a system based on speed, adaptation, and knowledge of the environment. Soldiers were learning to fight not against the planet, but with it. They learned to use the terrain, to anticipate the earthquakes, to move like the native creatures moved. "The first training cohort arrives next week," George said to one evening as they walked the settlement perimeter. "Soldiers from the Terran Navy, they want to test themselves here." "Are we ready for that?" asked. "We are never going to be completely ready," George said. "But we are ready enough, and they need to see what we have built. They need to understand that Nine is not something to be feared. It is something to be mastered." The first training group arrived on a morning when the dust storms were particularly heavy. There were 50 soldiers, the hardest men and women the Terran Navy had been able to find. They looked at Nine, and they saw only danger. They looked at the settlement, and they saw fragility. Let them think that for exactly one day. Then she put them through training that would have been called torture on any other world. They ran through terrain where predators hunted. They climbed cliffs that could collapse at any moment. They learned to construct shelters in minutes while the ground shook beneath their feet. They were pushed to their physical and mental limits. By the end of the first week, 3 soldiers had requested transfer off Nine. By the end of 2 weeks, every remaining soldier was beginning to understand what Commander Hayes had already known. This was not a hostile planet. This was a teacher, and it was one of the most effective teachers in existence. Engineer had continued his work on the settlement's infrastructure. He had developed new techniques for building structures that could withstand Nine's constant seismic activity. He had created water filtration systems that could purify even the planet's toxic groundwater. He had invented weapons and tools that worked better on Nine than any standard military equipment. But had also done something else. He had started building something that no one had requested. On the highest point in the settlement, he had begun construction on a monument. It was made from the stone of Nine itself, carved with the names of every soldier who had died on the planet. By the time 6 months had passed, there were 47 names carved into that stone. 47 humans who had come to this world and given their lives to make it livable for those who came after. The second training cohort arrived 2 months after the first. Then came a third. Within a year, 9 had become a legendary training ground. Soldiers who trained there returned to their units as soldiers who had been tested by fire and survived. They moved differently. They thought differently. They understood something about survival that other soldiers did not. One evening, stood with George in the command center overlooking the settlement. Through the large viewport, they could see the sun setting over 9's alien landscape. The sky was turning purple and orange, colors that no human had ever seen in their natural sky. The temperature was dropping as it always did at this time of day. "Do you remember when we thought we would never survive here?" George asked. "I remember thinking that we might die trying," corrected him. "But I never thought we would." The message came from the Galactic Council on a standard communication frequency. It was not a request. It was a notice of intent. Within 60 days, an official extraction team would arrive on 9 to begin mining operations on the mineral deposits that Dr. Victoria had discovered. The Council had made the decision without consulting Commander Hayes. They had decided that the resources of 9 belonged to the entire galactic community, not to humanity alone. Received the message in the command center early in the morning. She read it twice, then handed it to Captain George. He read it in silence. When he was finished, he looked at with anger in his eyes. "They are taking the planet," George said flatly. "Not if we stop them," replied. But stopping the Galactic Council was not simple. The Council was made up of representatives from 100 different species. It had power that no single human settlement could match. When sent an official response refusing the extraction operations, the Council's answer came quickly and coldly. They stated that humanity could either cooperate with the mining operations or lose management authority over 9 entirely. The choice was presented as simple: obey or be removed. Back on Earth, the situation created chaos. Some human governments wanted to fight the Council's decision. Others wanted to negotiate and compromise. Still others wanted to give in and accept whatever mining operations the Council decided to conduct. The unity that had existed when the original mission was sent to 9 began to fracture. For 3 weeks, watched the political arguments happen on distant communications networks. She watched the Council dismiss her concerns. She watched as corporate representatives from the collective and the Trade Alliance began preparing their equipment for large-scale mining operations. Then, without warning, the illegal mining began. A ship that had no Council authorization arrived at 9 without any notification. It was a corporate vessel belonging to a private mining consortium. It landed on the western side of the settlement, in an area that Victoria had identified as particularly unstable geologically. Immediately sent soldiers to demand that the mining company leave, but the corporate team had security forces of their own. For tense hours, human soldiers and corporate security faced each other across the red dirt of 9. No one fired weapons. No one made the first attack, but the confrontation was clear. The corporation intended to mine, and they would use force if necessary to do it. "We cannot fight the entire corporate security force and the Council at the same time," George told in the command center. "If we use weapons against them, we lose our position as the legitimate authority on this planet." Knew George was right, but she also knew that if they allowed the mining to begin, everything they had built would start to collapse. The planet that they had learned to understand and work with would be torn apart for profit. Before she could decide what to do, the planet made the decision for them. The corporate mining team had begun excavation in the unstable region. They had dug deep into the ground, removing stone and minerals without understanding the geological patterns that Victoria had documented. At exactly 3:47 a.m. on the morning of the third day of the illegal mining operation, a massive earthquake hit 9. It was not like the small, predictable tremors that came every 37 hours. This was violent and chaotic. The ground split. Structures that the corporation had not properly anchored collapsed. The excavation site opened up like a wound in the planet's surface. And the creatures came. The massive predators that lived beneath 9's surface were disturbed by the explosion. Thousands of them began moving toward the settlement. They were angry and hungry and territorial. The ground beneath them rippled with the aftershocks of the earthquake. Private Amy Foster was in the barracks when the quake hit. She felt the walls shaking and immediately ran to her command station. All around her, soldiers were moving with practiced efficiency. They had trained for earthquake response so many times that the motions came naturally. "All units respond," Commander Hayes ordered through the communication system. "We have massive seismic activity and unknown number of predators moving toward the settlement. Defensive positions now." The corporate security forces were in chaos. They had no knowledge of how to handle Nine's creatures. They had no training in earthquake response. They were firing weapons indiscriminately at predators that their bullets could barely hurt. But the humans knew what to do. George led one group of soldiers to the northern perimeter where the smallest creatures were beginning to emerge. He did not fire on them. Instead, he used the knowledge they had gained over the past year. He moved slowly. He made specific sounds that the creatures recognized. He held his position without fear. The creatures, responding to familiar sounds and calm humans, began to move past the settlement rather than attack it. They were not being turned away by force. They were being redirected by understanding. Private Amy Foster led another group to deal with the larger predators. She had her pack of tamed creatures with her, and she used them to communicate with the wild ones. A massive predator with teeth as long as human arms approached the settlement, ready to attack. Amy stood in front of it without raising a weapon. She looked into its eyes and held her ground. The creature hesitated. It had never seen a human stand like that. It had never seen a human project such calm in the face of such obvious danger. For a moment, it considered attacking. Then it turned and followed another group of creatures away from the settlement. For 6 hours, the earthquake continued in aftershocks. The predators kept coming. The corporate mining site was being destroyed by the creatures and the ground itself. And the human soldiers kept responding, not with weapons and violence, but with knowledge and understanding and bravery that came from months of learning this world. By dawn, the crisis had passed. The earthquake had stopped. The creatures had moved on. The settlement was damaged but intact. The illegal mining operation had been destroyed completely. The corporate ship had taken heavy damage and was no longer able to continue operations. What remained was a message. The galaxy could not destroy Nine without the humans standing in the way, and the humans would stand against anyone who tried. Captain George went to the council with a report of what had happened. The morning after the earthquake and the creature surge, the settlement was damaged but unbroken. Buildings had cracks in their walls. Equipment lay scattered where it had been thrown by the violent shaking. The water storage tanks had split and emptied, but no human was dead. Against all odds, they had survived the planet's fury. Commander Hayes stood in the central courtyard as soldiers worked on repairs. She watched them move with a practiced efficiency that would have been impossible a year ago. They were dirty. They were tired. But they were also transformed. They were no longer soldiers who had been sent to survive on a, they were soldiers who had learned to thrive on it. Engineer approached her carrying a data pad showing repair estimates. "The settlement can be operational again within 3 days," he said. "The damage is manageable, the structures held." Nodded. "The ground will shake again in about 34 hours, she said. "Make sure everything is secured before then." Smiled slightly. A year ago, that kind of prediction would have been impossible. Now it was routine. The council's decision came through official communication channels 2 weeks after the earthquake. The vote had been close, but the result was clear. Nine would remain under human authority. Limited mining operations would be permitted only under strict human oversight, and the planet would be officially recognized as the primary military training ground for the entire galactic community. But there was more. The Council had also launched an investigation into the corporate mining consortium. Evidence showed that they had known the mining would be dangerous. They had chosen to proceed anyway because the profits would have been enormous. The criminal charges that followed sent shockwaves through corporate circles across the galaxy. It became clear that the humans had not just defended a planet. They had changed the way the galaxy thought about the balance between profit and responsibility. Over the following months, soldiers from 100 different species began arriving at Nine. There were beings with 4 arms and blue skin like Coordinator. There were creatures made of crystalline structures that reflected light strangely. There were species whose natural forms made it difficult for humans to even identify them as alive. All of them came to train. All of them came to test themselves against a world that demanded their best. The training program that George had developed became the most prestigious military academy in known space. Soldiers who trained on Nine were known across the galaxy for their ability to stay calm in any crisis, to find solutions to impossible problems, and to never abandon those beside them. The planet that all species had thought was worthless became the most valuable piece of real estate in human space. Private Amy Foster became the lead instructor for animal behavior and planet management. She had continued to work with the native predators, and she had discovered something remarkable. The creatures could be trained, not forced into obedience but genuinely taught to cooperate with humans. She had expanded her original pack of 5 creatures to a group of 20, and each one responded to her commands because they had learned to trust her. Other instructors began learning from her techniques. One day, during a training exercise, a situation developed that would become legendary in the settlement. A group of soldiers, the same species that had tried to exploit Nine's resources, was training in the northern region. They encountered a massive predator, one that had never been tamed, one that had killed 3 soldiers in its lifetime. The soldiers opened fire immediately. They used standard combat tactics. They tried to kill the creature before it could attack them. But the creature was faster and stronger and more intelligent than any of them had expected. It killed one soldier before the others could retreat. Amy arrived at the scene with her pack of trained creatures. The soldiers prepared for a battle, but Amy did something different. She advanced toward the massive predator without a weapon. She made the sounds that she had learned over the past year. She moved with the confidence that comes from understanding rather than from fear. The massive predator turned toward her. For a moment, it seemed like it would attack. The soldiers raised their weapons, ready to fire, but Amy did not flinch. She continued forward with her hand open and her movements calm. The creature stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly it moved away. It did not attack. It did not kill. It chose to leave because a human had shown it that it did not need to be violent. The soldiers were stunned. They had been taught to see Nine as a place of death. They had been taught to fight or be killed. But Amy had shown them something else. She had shown them that understanding and bravery could accomplish what weapons could not. That soldier's name was broadcast across communication networks. It became a story that other species told their young. It became proof that humans were different, that humans could do things that other species could not. 1 year after the earthquake, Commander Hayes stood on the ridge where she had stood many times before. The settlement spread below her was no longer temporary. It had become permanent. It had become home. Buildings made from Nine's stone rose up from the red dirt. Gardens had been established where human botanists had learned to grow earth crops in the alien soil. The water recycling system had been perfected to the point where they could sustain a population of thousands. Captain George stood beside her, as he had countless times in the past. "The Terran Coalition is sending a diplomatic delegation next month," George said. "They want to establish official relations with the government we have created here. We are becoming more than a military installation. We are becoming a city." Did not respond immediately. She looked out at the sunset over Nine's alien landscape. She thought about the humans who had died to make this world livable. She thought about Engineer's monument, now filled with 93 names. She thought about the soldiers who had come to this place and been transformed. "We came here to survive," said finally. "And we survived. But then we did something more important. We learned. We adapted. We chose to understand rather than to conquer. That is what separates humans from species that are more powerful than us. That is why the Council was right to send us here." Over the next 5 years, Nine's transformation continued. The settlement grew into a city that housed over 50,000 soldiers, scientists, and support personnel. Training programs expanded to include not just military skills, but also planetary management and sustainable living. Scientists from across the galaxy came to study how humans had created a thriving civilization on a world that everyone had said was impossible. Dr. Victoria's research became the foundation for new approaches to planetary development. Her work proved that understanding a world's geology and ecology was more valuable than trying to extract maximum resources quickly. Universities across the galaxy began teaching her methods. Engineer trained a new generation of builders who could construct settlements on hostile worlds. His techniques were used to establish outposts on 5 other Class 10 and higher. The impossible became routine. On the 15th anniversary of the human arrival, a celebration was held in the central square of the city. Soldiers from 100 different species gathered to honor the achievement. Commander Hayes, now officially governor of Nine, stood before them and spoke. We came here because we were told it was impossible, said. We came here because we had nothing to lose and everything to prove. We came here because we are human, and humans do not accept that anything is impossible. She paused and looked out at the crowd. This planet tried to kill us. It shook the ground beneath our feet. It sent creatures to hunt us. It poisoned the air we breathed, and we did not leave. We did not surrender. We learned. We adapted. We made peace with this world by refusing to conquer it, by refusing to take more than we needed, by protecting those who could not protect themselves. A soldier from the collective stood and began to applaud. Then soldiers from other species stood and joined in. Soon the entire courtyard was filled with the sound of recognition and respect from 100 different worlds. On that day, 9 had become more than a training ground. It had become a symbol of what humanity could achieve when they refused to accept impossible as an answer. It had become proof that the galaxy's most powerful achievement was not won through weapons or technology, but through courage, understanding, and the simple refusal to give up. As the sun set over 9's alien landscape, thought about Earth. She thought about the humans who had come before and learned to survive in harsh conditions. She thought about how that same quality that had kept humans alive through ice ages and extinction events had brought them to this world and made them legendary in the eyes of 1,000 species. 9 had been but humans had not come to conquer it or exploit it or extract everything of value from it. They had come and stayed and learned and built something that had never existed before. They had turned a place of death into a place of life. They had taken the impossible and made it real. And in doing so, they had changed forever how the galaxy saw humanity. The story of 9 would be told for generations. It would be told in schools and military academies and governmental chambers. It would become the example of what humans could do, not because they were stronger or smarter than other species, but because they refused to accept that anything was beyond their reach, because they valued life more than profit, because they chose principle over advantage. That was what made humans exceptional. And 9, the class 14 that no other species could tame, would stand forever as proof. E documented the illegal mining operation. He showed evidence of how the mining had caused the earthquake. He presented data showing how many lives the corporate activity had endangered. And then he did something unexpected. He proposed a new arrangement. 9 would remain under human control. Mining operations would be limited to sustainable levels that would not disturb the planet's geological stability. The training facility would remain open to soldiers from all species who wanted to prove themselves, and humans would serve as the guardians of the planet, ensuring that profit never overrode responsibility. The Galactic Council was divided. Some representatives supported the corporate interests. Others were impressed by what the humans had done. They had defended a planet. They had refused to be dominated by profit or power. They had chosen principle over advantage. The debate continued in the council chambers for weeks, but the tide of opinion was shifting. The other species in the galaxy had noticed something important. Humans, when given an impossible task, did not just survive. They transformed the impossible into something legendary. And they had done it not through force or dominance, but through understanding and sacrifice. Humans do not come to a place and fail. We come and we stay and we make it work. The council will want more resources soon, George said quietly. They will want to extract minerals. They will want to maximize profit. Did not answer immediately. She looked out at the settlement that her people had built from nothing. She looked at the soldiers moving between buildings. She looked at the training ground that they had created. She thought about the 47 names on the monument. Then we will have to remind them why we came here, said finally. We came not to take from this planet, but to learn from it, and we have learned something that will change everything about how humans see the galaxy. The first year on 9 had transformed the mission from an impossible suicide assignment into humanity's greatest strategic achievement. But the challenges were far from over. Soon, the galaxy would begin to notice what humans had accomplished, and not everyone would be happy about it. George nodded. Neither of them said anything more. They did not need to. They had already decided to accept the mission the moment Coordinator had walked into the room.